Okay, welcome everybody. We're now recording. Glad you could join us here. Just putting in the chat the Nearpod. You have not yet received that, so please jump onto the Nearpod so we can follow along and get rolling that way. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. All right, so you can follow along with the Nearpod at the same time. Remember, this session is being recorded for learning purposes. And expectations, we do it. Make sure you're following along with the Nearpod lesson. Make sure you're using the chat tools respectfully and appropriately, and you're responding to questions and instructions the first time as we're going through this. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about the corrections. Corrections. So corrections has a lot to do with jail, prison, parole, all that kind of stuff. So we'll be talking about that in a second, but let me just go back to the course real quick. Remember, you do have the recordings that I put up on the class announcement board. So if you missed those, this is where to find them. If you push the class plan, this is what we got. We have live class today. Then you have the lesson 6 quiz corrections that is due on the 2nd. And the end of the block ends on the 17th. So that you basically have, after this class, the last thing you have about a week and a half to turn everything in. So we make sure you're aware of that and are getting to it. So especially last week, remember I sent out a recorded lesson and you had something that was due yesterday, lesson 5 assignment, the stick up kid assignment. So make sure you're doing that and we kind of get that done and rolling there. Okay, so as we're rolling here, these people may look familiar. Okay. Remember Home Improvement, Tim Allen, right there. Justin Bieber. Yep. He has a little bit of a criminal record. Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man. I can't remember who this lady is. We have Snoop Dogg. Mel Gibson. This person right here, one of the most wealthy people in the world. Anybody know who that is? Where my cursor's at? That's Bill Gates. I'm not sure who that lady is. I'd have to be like that. Hugh Grant. That one, I'm not sure who that one is. And that guy looks familiar, but I can't remember. I think maybe a little bit older generations there, but even Hollywood has they have their criminal histories, let's just say that. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to watch a little video about the prison system throughout time. And this is pretty interesting because it kind of goes over how crime and how punishment we used to do that. Okay, somebody said Kim Delaney, maybe. I'm not sure who that is. All right. Okay, so let's watch this and then we'll move forward.
Until the 1500s, prisons weren't a punishment in their own right, but used for debtors or as a holding place for criminals before trial or sentencing. Conditions depended on how much you could pay your jailer for food and bedding. Bridewell Prison was opened in 1553 as part hospital, part orphanage and part shelter for vagabonds, but also a deterrent with harsh conditions. Similar houses of correction were extended to all towns in 1576. County jails were run by the local sheriff, but despite efforts at regulation by JPs and even Oliver Cromwell, by the 1700s they were still fairly awful places. Men, women and children were thrown in together with serious and petty offenders, leading to bullying and overcrowded and terrible conditions, and with prisoners dying of jail fever, probably typhus and spread by lice. Between 1776 and 87, prisoners were held in rotting old warships called hulks with a 25% death rate. From the late 1700s, humanitarian reformers such as Howard and Fry lobbied for rehabilitation and better conditions as more criminals were incarcerated and the bloody code and transportation fell out of favour. By 1850, 90% of criminals were sent to prison, and the central government extended its control with prison inspectors and a National Prisons Commission. In 1842, Pentonville Prison was built along the lines of the separate system, housing 520 prisoners who spent 23 hours a day alone in their cells and exercised in masks to prevent human contact. Intended to give prisoners time for reflection, this led to high rates of insanity, delusion, and suicide. In 1865, the Prisons Act promised hard labour, hard fare, and hard board, forcing prisoners to spend hours a day on the treadmill, the crank, and shot drill. 1902 saw new principles for prisons with the abolition of hard labour and the introduction of borstalls until 1988, when they were replaced by young offenders institutions. In the first half of the century, shaved heads and arrows on uniforms were ended, and education, training, and paid work were introduced. However, throughout the century, the government struggled against the problems of reoffending, expense, and overcrowding, with 85,000 prisoners in 2010, and the Strange-Way Prisons riot of April 1990 highlighting ongoing problems with the prison system.
So that went really quick, but what to take from that is things, the prison system has evolved throughout the years, and being so punitive beforehand, they found out that just causing somebody as what they would call a deterrent, right, or retribution, maybe is not the best way to be able to help people. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to go over these 4 terms, and these 4 terms are probably going to be on your quiz. So make sure you are familiar with these. The first one's retribution. The second one's deterrence. The third one is rehabilitation. And then the last one's custodial. Okay. So let's go through these and talk about them. So retribution, and this is all kind of seeing why maybe we send people into correction facilities and stuff like that. So retributions are those who support this goal, feel that people who break the law do so on purpose and deserve to be punished. Okay, for example, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth kind of theory. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation about this in a little bit, a group discussion, but maybe retribution, it isn't always that they do things on purpose, right? Some people are forced or coerced into doing something, and so it's not always really about they deserve to get something bad done to them if they did something bad to somebody else, right? So it's kind of hard. You have to really be like, what is going on in that person's head at the time, which is hard to know. The next one's deterrence, okay? Deterrence is something that the penalty should exceed the true value of the crime in order to show people that crime does not pay. For example of this is punishment needs to be made public. So there is a case study of a judge for a juvenile delinquent that stole goods. What he made him do to deter him from doing it again is he made him carry around a sign on a very highly public road, and the sign said basically, I stole this, I am a thief. And so they're hoping that that social mediated punishment would deter him from possibly stealing again. And that's one thing that we think, that the shame, being able to shame somebody, is going to stop them from doing something again. So that's a way of looking at things. Another way is rehabilitation. Okay, so this is considered to be the most humane policy that there is. The purpose is to change the guilty party so that they are no longer need or want to commit crimes. So, for example, if they don't have a job, being able to get them a job in order to support themselves, in order to get them free from. I have my brother and sister-in-law in Southern Utah. They actually run the drug court, and so one of the things they do is they provide counseling because they're basically counselors. They provide counseling for substance abuse. So that would be a portion of rehabilitation, and hopefully getting them to not go in what we call this revolving door of corrections, which is, once you get in the system, you get let out and you come right back in because you can't support yourself. So that's what rehabilitation is. And the last one is custodial. And this, the goal is not concerned with what the cause of the crime, nor is there an effort to change the crime. Okay. So basically it's just that you are putting them in because that is what they should just, that's what we do. Right. And I feel like a lot of times the United States has so many people in the correction facility system that we don't know what to do with them all. I mean, we've built big, huge prisons that hold, thousands and thousands of people, and so many million people are incarcerated, and their rights are kind of taken away, and we're just basically hosting them for there. So those are kind of the theories, okay? So as I ask this question here, which theory do you support the most? Do you support retribution, deterrence, rehabilitation, or custodial? And then make sure you put why. Okay, so let's see some of your thoughts. Okay, you don't know. You can think of one of them. Which one would you like? If you were in that situation, let's put it in this use. If you were in that situation, which one would you want for yourself? Would you want a theory of retribution, deterrence, custodial, or rehabilitation? Okay. So somebody said retribution. To me, personally, having someone punished would be way better because of the crime they have done. Don't think they deserve it or something like that. Okay. All right. Somebody said rehabilitation because it makes the most sense to me. Okay. Rehabilitation, it gives them a chance for a different future. Okay. I like that. And it kind of helps them be able to get back on track. Rehabilitation because it gives people a second chance and change their lives. Okay. Rehabilitation, it will take a while for some others to turn around, but at some point I believe everybody can learn. Yeah, right. We all kind of learn from our mistakes, right? I understand that. Like, we all do not very smart things. Okay, rehabilitation gives them a chance to change. Deterrence for certain crimes because it can deter them from the same crime and not do a major one. Yeah. So maybe you do have theories that include multiple, right? Because it is nice to have something there that, you know, is going to say, hey, this is a consequence if you do it. And it's going to think you're going to think twice before doing it again, right? Say, I don't know. It would really depend on what happened to the person. Okay. So drug addicts, they would need help. Or if it was a killer, they may need a different treatment. Very good point. Okay. I like that because you don't exactly know, right? I mean, if this guy is really a psychopath, you're not going to want him to basically be there. So very good, guys. Thank you all for those that put those on there. Okay, let's talk about AP&P, which stands for Adult Probation and Parole. Okay, it provides a pre-sentencing report to the court when a defendant is waiting sentence. Okay, they are accountable to the sentencing judge. So what happens is after a certain amount of time, some due to overcrowding in our correction facilities, and some because they want them to have a second chance, you could go on what's called probation or parole. I was watching one movie. It was a true documentary about somebody that committed a crime, and I won't go into the details, but his punishment is he got house arrest. I think it was like 7 months of house arrest. He had to wear like a anklet monitor and stuff like that. For a lot of people that commit crimes that are not violent and are not that egregious, what they do is they look at more putting them on probation and parole. Parole usually includes like seeing like a probation officer, going in and checking in with them, making sure you're following certain standards, and that sometimes they put you up in certain housing. You have to live at that place. They usually call it like a halfway house, and they provide some sort of a job, and you have to stay. You have like certain restrictions that are placed on you, and they slowly fade after you do stuff like that. So Utah Board of Pardons and Patrol, they're pardons and parole. They're the ones that grant parole to inmates. Also, I wanted to mention that pardons means that they their crimes were basically waived, and they're free to kind of go. So these guys are the ones that grant parole to inmates, and so if you do an appeal or you've spent so much time to be considered for parole, usually there's like a law on the books. It's written in Utah code that there's so much amount of time, and then you will have a hearing up towards the parole board where you can look at getting off on parole. Okay, let's talk about a little bit about prison life. Okay, so prison life, the key element of prison life is the classification of incoming inmates. Okay, so they do not put like inmates that have served like egregious crimes with those that are just small time offenders. You can see how maybe that bad attitude or bad behavior could wear off onto somebody that is not necessarily that much into crime, right? This is the systematic products of new inmates by establishing a program of treatment and indicating their privilege they'll be allowed and the restrictions they will be imposed. So once you go in, they'll do it. There is a lot of inmates, what they do is they get jobs while they're in prison. They're paid a very small wage for those jobs, but they're allowed to keep the money in their accounts, and which the prison oversees, but you're able to get things, such as different like commodities, like well, for some inmates, they smoke, so cigarettes or, something to that effect. There are certain visitation privileges, which can be disallowed or limited if needed. Guards that operate the prison, much of the day-to-day operation is handled by actually inmates, trustees is what they call them. So for example, like your job may be laundry duty and you're the one that actually has to do all the laundry for the whole entire thing. The prison guards are there just to oversee. For example, also like in the kitchen or the mess hall, the inmates basically run those areas, and they're basically served and they get a job to do and they get paid for that job. So it's kind of a way to kind of keep the cost down and keep, from civilians almost kind of coming in. Shakedowns, okay? Inmates and their property may be searched at any point in time under any condition without the inmates, with or without the inmate's presence. So, for example, your constitutional rights are not valid while you're in prison. So unreasonable search and seizure would not be afforded to you. So there's different trends and kind of corrections. You've probably seen movies where they have the stripes that they kind of wear. That used to be more back in the early 1900s. Today, you'll probably see a lot of, if you drive down the road, you may see some inmates that are doing community service. And they do that with an alternative of going to jail. They get to go and do so much community service, and usually they have to be identified and wear the jumpsuits, right? The orange jumpsuits. Okay, so you also have day fines while you're in there. An individual who receives a fine would pay the proportionate amount of a specific weight of the wage that they get. So there are different things that they have to pay for. So there's different size and location of institutions. Future jails and prison will probably be much smaller, but right now they are very big. Like right now are the big prison in Utah. There are hosted at the point of the mountain, but they are actually selling that property and moving them out. Sometimes they move them out to more rural areas. Just so I believe there's one in Gunnison, a fairly big one in Gunnison, and throughout the state. Future prison will be more located in cities and suburbs where the inmates can locate a job, find recreation and schooling, and maintain family ties. So one thing they've looked at doing is for inmates, instead of, they thought it would be better to get them out of the environment or situation they're in. And so they actually would take an inmate, and if they live, like say in Utah, they would host them in, Nevada or Washington or someplace farther away. They said that it would be good for them because they could get away from the environment they're in. But research has more found that if they have a support system that is not a negative influence on them nearby, it's better to keep them locally. Okay, restoration of offenders' rights. After years of good behavior release, offenders can then vote. They can run for office and even erase conviction records. But it takes time and be able to prove yourself. If you do have a felony, you can still not be able to vote. Okay, prison rights. So prison officials cannot open letters addressed to the inmate's lawyer. Okay. Inmates can be prohibited from having a long hair. A cell can be searched at any time for any reason. The prisoner is not required to pay inmate minimum wages. So that's how they get away with not paying them a lot for their jobs as they are in prison. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to kind of discuss is there are some prisoners, even in Utah, that are on what we call death row. And this is something that has been very discussed and people have some very strong opinions on. And so I think we kind of need to be a little bit sensitive for that. Oh, somebody had in the chat, why can't they have long hair? Well, it said they can be prohibited from having long hair. So some prisons may accept them to have long hair and some may not. If it gets in the way of their job, they may have them cut it, or if it's getting to, it's just not their opinion. But I think, especially for women, if they want to have long hair, I believe most prisons that host women allowed to have long hair. Good question, though. So back to the capital punishment. So it's something that is maybe takes a lot to kind of think through everything. But there are some egregious crimes that they have posted that have put them on death row. Now, a lot of these places have gone through appeals, and a lot of these people have been found without a shadow of a doubt that they have basically committed these egregious crimes. And so they are open for capital punishment. The majority of people on death row will basically serve a life sentence rather than being the death penalty happen for them. But if they are not actively going through an appeals process, they could get the death penalty. And not very often, but occasionally they do have the death penalty. So my question for you, and I said this may be a little bit sensitive and stuff like that. Maybe you want to put on here if you are not opposed, in favor or opposed to the death penalty, and why. And let's see if we could have a little discussion on that. Are you in favor of or opposed to the death penalty, and why? I wanted to mention that Lily said that some penitentiaries do it, meaning cut the hair, to prevent pulling of the hair during fights or self-inflicting harm. They can get in the way, or they can also hide things. Very good. Okay, so we have a comment up here. Thank you. Well, I would say that it depends on the crime. So if it's a major thing, like a bombing of 20 people, yeah, someone should just go. Okay. Yeah, I think it always depends on what it was. If you had like a serial killer, right, and they're convicted, should we do that or should we not, right? Somebody said opposed. A person has time to regret and make better choices. They're giving a lifetime sentence. Okay. Very good. Opposed because it can be abused by certain people. That's very interesting. You kind of said that it kind of be abused. You can kind of see maybe political leaders or something like that may use it for some reason. Okay. No, not really, but it mainly depends on the person did the crime, the seriousness of the crime. Okay. In favor, depending on what they did. Okay. I'm in favor of the death penalty. Throughout the years, there have been serial killers, manslaughter who have done horrible things. Yeah, there's a psych ward, but I mean, they really don't deserve the death penalty after they kill innocent ones. Okay. To the extent, yes, if someone has multiple time serial killer, for example, I think that may be a good option. Okay. I think it depends on what they did. If you rob someone, then no. But if you were a serial killer, maybe. I think the death penalty is the very last resort. Okay. And I think it is becoming the very last resort. And probably it's not even an option in some states. They have taken that completely off the table. It always vary upon the case. Yep. And I think that's kind of thing. It really depends upon the case and the evidence and, you know, if they maybe show remorse and how that all works, right? It's really hard to be able to, and we can't really do it, be able to get into somebody's head and understand where they're coming from, what they're thinking. And I think that's why a lot of these places are trending towards rehabilitation and kind of getting this way. So just so you know, if you go to Unit 6 Corrections, you have the quiz right here. I will post the video here. But you just have a quiz that you're able to take, and that's going to be your exit ticket / assignment for this week. So if you have any questions, please contact me here. I'll stop the recording now and get that posted, but I'm going to stick around for any questions you may have. Thanks, guys.